Welcome to the NFL on Fox podcast presented by Verizon, the NFL powered by Verizon 5G. I am your host, Dave Helman. Busy Tuesday show to recap Week 7. So much news and insight coming out of a huge Week 7 slate. We're going to talk to NFL on Fox Insider Jay Glazer later on about some of the biggest updates from Sunday's games. Going to check in on the new power rankings after a lot of movement this week. But first, there were two more games to get to, and we're going to break them down right now. Check out our Monday Night Football recap. Let's get things started with a recap of all things Monday Night Football. It was another doubleheader week, so a very busy Monday night. To give me an assist on recapping all of the action, I am joined by our friend, Fox Sports reporter Carmen Vitali. Carm, how we doing?
Not great, but we'll get to that.
We will get to that. A very somber ending note in the first Monday night game, Tampa Bay, Baltimore. Plenty to say about that game. Let's start it off with the second game, the more straightforward game. A football match was played at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona. The Cardinals do beat the Chargers 17-15. Teams traded field goal drives in the final 2 minutes. The Cardinals get the last laugh. I don't have a whole lot else to say. I do want to point out a very fun stat. James Conner was the hero here. He had a 33-yard catch and run to set the Cardinals up for the walk-off field goal. Did not realize James Conner just logged his 6th career game with 100 rushing yards and 50 receiving yards. 6 since 2018, and the only guy in the NFL with more is Christian McCaffrey. I really do think James Conner is one of the more underrated players in the NFL.
Absolutely. When nobody has talked about him this season, especially, and over the last couple of games in particular. And I just, I'm guilty of it too. I'll be quite honest with you. So let's give more love to James Conner.
The Arizona Cardinals pulled to 3-4. The NFC West is just a chaotic train wreck.
Yes.
Not 100% sure what to do with that division. I don't think anybody expected the Cardinals and 49ers having the same record after 7 weeks. All right. I apologize to Cardinals fans. Big win for y'all. But a much more impactful Monday night game was also played earlier at Raymond James Stadium in Tampa. I mean, a thrilling game. 41-31, Ravens get the win.
Yeah.
Almost 1,000 yards of offense, points galore. Lamar Jackson made an MVP statement, if I've ever seen one. Really answered the bell from Jared Goff's performance on Sunday.
You honestly had a great tweet about Lamar Jackson. Like, everyone's like, after this weekend, who's up there with Jared Goff? That's gotta be one of the best performances we've ever. Lamar Jackson.
Complimenting my tweets will get you everywhere on this show, just for the record.
But
okay, we will talk plenty of Lamar. We're going to talk about this big Ravens win, but a strange, bizarre, sad, like I said, somber sequence at the end of this game really put a damper on everything. 41-31 is the final, but the Ravens had this game put away with 6-7 minutes to play. They were up 41-18. The Bucs stage a furious rally. Honestly, lost in all of this, maybe one of the best onside kicks I've ever seen.
Yes, and the fact that they replicated it, Chase McLaughlin, he did it again, and they didn't recover it the second time, but it was the exact same kick, and it gave the Bucs a chance to get it.
That leads us to the unfortunate situation where the Bucs are down 10 with just over a minute to play. Clearly, even with everything we just said about nice kicking performances, this game is over. And unfortunately, Bucs receiver Chris Godwin suffers what the Bucs believe to be a dislocated ankle. Really,
ending his season, if that's the case.
It's very likely a season ender. It was really nasty looking in real time. You see the scenes here. He's loaded onto the cart. That's obviously
there's an air cast already. Never a good sign.
Baker
Teammates
Mayfield
are coming over,
slamming his helmet on the ground in frustration.
Baker was really shaken up after delivering that pass, for sure. Like, he was, for the entire time that Chris was on the ground, on the field, Baker couldn't even look. He was so distraught.
This also comes with the added problem that Mike Evans left this game early after injuring his hamstring on a go ball to the end zone, comes up screaming in pain, exits with the Buccaneers training staff. Don't know the severity of that, but he didn't return to the game after an injury that happened, I believe, in the first quarter. So
second.
Excuse me.
Yeah, right at the beginning of the second quarter.
Point being,
yeah,
such fantastic players. Mike Evans, a potential Hall of Fame player, faces of that franchise, key pieces of the team that won the Super Bowl in 2020.
And this was also coming after Mike Evans had caught his 100th touchdown, putting him into the ranks with Hall of Famers as far as the amount of yards he's accumulated, the amount of touchdowns he's had in his career, and it just dampens the whole thing that the next go around, he ends up getting hurt.
You could get whiplash from the high of the beginning of this game for Tampa versus the low of the end, because they came out with their hair on fire. They punched Baltimore right in the mouth. They went right down the field. Mike Evans caught his 100th career touchdown. They go up 10-0. It looks like they're ready to make a statement about their place in the pecking order of the NFL. Not only do the Ravens roll over them from there, but they lose Chris Godwin in what feels like kind of a meaningless moment. And I think that is going to be, if you're listening to this on a Tuesday morning, that's what everybody in the sports world is going to be talking about right now, is that you already lost Mike Evans. You lose Chris Godwin in a situation where you probably can't win this game. And it's no surprise Buccaneers head coach Todd Bowles was asked several questions about why his veteran receivers even on the field at all.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it, though, all of the starters were in. This wasn't a situation where just Chris Godwin was in or anything like that. The guys wanted to stay on the field. And there's a couple of things that you point to when things like this are happening, which is improbable comebacks do happen, as improbable as they are. These guys in particular want to be on the field. And yes, as a coach, you kind of have a responsibility to save these guys from themselves. But there are also multiple coaches. Don't forget, Todd does not call the defense or call the offense. He calls the defense. And not that there's anybody to really blame in these scenarios. It's just a matter of this stuff unfortunately happens. I don't think it's fair to say you needed to wave the white flag and pull your guys when you did get kind of the injection of adrenaline from the onside kick. It's improbable, but these guys want to stay out there and keep playing, as evidenced by the fact that, I think the coaches just kind of let Baker stay on the field after the Chris Godwin injury to exercise some demons at that point, because it didn't make a whole lot of sense to keep throwing the ball. And I'm here to say that's absolutely true. But I also feel like that was kind of Baker being like, I don't know what to do right now. I need to just get this out.
I'll go as far as to say, yeah, stuff happens in football. Football players play football. That type of stuff goes with the territory. And I do think fans sometimes lose sight of the fact this is NFL football where there's 46 guys dressed for a game.
Yeah.
You can't wholesale swap out chunks of your roster the way that you can in college football. Having said that, number one, Chris Godwin maybe is the exception of a player where you consider doing that. A veteran player, a player with an injury history, a player that plays a position where you have several other options. The Bucs didn't sit any receivers for this game. So Todd Bowles made note of the fact that, look, we already lost Mike. How many guys do we have? But Sterling Shepard, Jalen McMillan, Trey Palmer, all in uniform.
Right.
Chris Godwin didn't need to be on the field. But having said that, I'll even go as far as to say, hey, shit happens in the NFL. But after the injury, continuing to chuck the ball with even less time remaining.
That's why I say I literally think it was Baker Mayfield just kind of refusing to come off, exercising whatever demons he had. You saw how shaken up he was because obviously he threw the ball to Chris that got him hurt. So I feel like this was Baker's way of just kind of working and processing through that, quite honestly. And that was a very human moment for him.
It's just, it just sucks because this was, and their season's not over. They're still above 500. We'll see the severity of the Mike Evans injury, but man, they have been so fun. And this feels like it puts a hard cap on their ceiling when you're talking about potentially multiple pieces of their passing game being out.
Which had been so incredibly productive and, more importantly, so incredibly fun. That's what's so heartbreaking about all of this, is that the Buccaneers have been rolling, and in different ways. We even saw it this game against the Ravens. They ran the ball really well, especially to begin the game, and they have now this three-headed backfield offensive backfield, with Rachaad White coming back into the lineup, and it's so unfortunate for a team that was having so much fun to lose both of their glue guys. I mean, it's not just that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are the best receivers on this team. They're some of the best people and the best teammates that you have. They're best leaders that you have in that locker room. And to see both of them go down is almost unfathomable. Like, I think I'm still completely in disbelief that it happened in the same game. And it's so incredibly unfortunate luck. It happens in prime time. It happens at home. I mean, these guys are they're so close in this locker room. And to see this happen to two of their best is it's incredibly heartbreaking.
I do want to throw this out there. I think it's worth clarifying. Crush Todd Bowles all you want to if you feel like Chris Godwin shouldn't have been out there. But in the immediate aftermath of this, there was a lot going around that Bowles didn't understand the rules, that there's a hard cap on the number of onside kick attempts you're able to have. That's not true.
That's not true.
Our friend Peter Schrager clarified it pretty quickly after the game. That rule was proposed at some point while the NFL was tinkering with all of its kickoff rules.
I guess whatever was cached in like the Google search, whatever Google produced a wrong result.
This is a different conversation, but search engines are nowhere near as trustworthy,
reliable as you want them to be.
Our own Dean Blandino also took to X to clarify this as well. Dean said he quote tweeted Peter's tweet and said, "There's no limit to the number of onside kicks a team can attempt. The only restrictions are it has to be the fourth quarter
and you have to be trailing.
Yes. Otherwise, it's all fair game." So there's no rule that Todd Bowles didn't know. He just thought his guys should be on the field. You can second guess that all you want to, but at the very least, I'll do the Bucs the credit of saying they didn't run afoul of an imaginary NFL rule.
No.
But it's a huge damper on what had been a fun season at this point. Hoping for the best for Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. We'll see where the Buccaneers go from here, but just a bummer of a way to cap off what had been a really entertaining Monday night game.
True.
Now, that does not mean that we're not going to give some flowers to the Baltimore Ravens, who, like I said, it reminded me of Thanos fighting the Avengers, where like Captain America gave him a great punch across the jaw. And the Ravens just turned right back around and like threw a planet at the Buccaneers. Like, that's what it felt like I was watching, where the Ravens go down 10-0. And from there, Lamar Jackson just went nuts.
Yeah.
17 of 22 on the night for 281, 5 touchdowns. He threw as many touchdowns as he did incompletions, added 52 rushing yards to that. After the first,
he was throwing a complete game up into like the fourth quarter. Or maybe it was the third, but he was throwing a complete game, or a perfect game. Sorry. There's been a lot of baseball going on lately too. He had a perfect passer rating into the third quarter.
So the Ravens punted on their first possession. Remember, the Bucs sacked Lamar twice. Yaya Diaby got in on it. Antoine Winfield and Levante David got in on it. And like I said, you're like, oh, the Bucs defense, everybody's healthy. Let's see what they can do.
Yeah.
After that punt, the Ravens go touchdown, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, touchdown. Then they did have a fumble. They are human after all. I guess they do make mistakes. That was the play where Lamar threw into the flat and he threw it behind his receiver.
Yes.
We thought Zion McCollum was going to have the coolest touchdown return of the season. And unfortunately,
rule of cool should be a real thing.
And even after that fumble,
yeah,
and the Bucs score to make it 34-18, they went right back down the field. Lamar looked flawless.
Yeah.
Derrick Henry, ironically, a slow start for him. It looked like the Bucs had bottled him up. And then late in the third, he tears off an 81-yard run. This is 4th career run of 80-plus yards. He's on a very short list of guys that have done that in the last 30 years. These guys look unstoppable, man.
Yeah.
When both of them are on, and they basically have been all season at this point, I don't know how many defenses are equipped to do anything about it.
Honestly, it was really impressive what Lamar was doing when Derrick Henry wasn't really getting going. Because you're right, for at least the first half, Derrick Henry had a very, very quiet night. And instead, you have Mark Andrews catching touchdowns. You have 2 of them, in fact. You have Rashad Bateman, who finished 4 of 4 for 121 yards and a touchdown. Like, Lamar was dealing even when Derrick Henry was not a huge part of their offensive production. And that's what's so impressive this year. And this is why you're seeing everybody talk about how, yes, Lamar won MVP last year, but he's playing better football this year. It's wild, the tear that Lamar Jackson in particular is on.
Do we want to throw that up there somewhere? Do we have the splits between Lamar this year and Lamar last year? Because it's wild. Yeah.
There it is.
Newsflash. I knew we had them. This is incredible stuff. Lamar Jackson won MVP in 2023, and the 2024 version, I'd go as far as to say, is
significantly better,
blowing him out of the water.
Yes.
To this point in the season.
Yes.
And I know there's still plenty of season left, but at this point, and we can get into this in a minute, at this point, it's just a question of whether Derrick Henry is going to vulture MVP votes away from Lamar, because and that is a valid conversation when you consider how much better the Ravens look with a threat like that in their backfield. Because with Derrick Henry taking up that type of attention, it just makes things so much easier on everybody else. I mean,
it's why there was nobody around Rashad Bateman most of the night, Mark Andrews most of the night. Like, you're sacrificing guys down in the box to contend with Derrick Henry. And then you're leaving these one-on-one matchups to Mark Andrews, especially, who now looks like, I was like, welcome back.
Yeah.
This is the
Mark Andrews,
the toe drag swag from a tight end. That is especially sick.
Mark Andrews fantasy managers, chill the hell out. Okay.
Right.
It's a long season.
It's a long season. He's coming back from injury. It takes a little while.
Rashad Bateman with like a 98 Randy Moss-esque stat line, 4 catches on 4 targets for 121 and a touch. It's disgusting.
Yeah.
And yeah, Zay Flowers was the one that had the quiet night tonight, but guess what? You don't need all those guys to ball at the same time when you're moving the ball this effectively on the ground. It's truly impressive. The Ravens moved to 5-2. They certainly are on the short list of real deal contenders. I think the only team that I'd be definitively willing to put above them is the Kansas City Chiefs. And that's really more about respect than anything.
Right.
That's more
the
about
fact that I refuse to bet against Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes.
That's more about what they've done than how they're playing. But a banner night for Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, and the rest of the Baltimore Ravens, which is a perfect segue, because we were going to talk about this anyway. We wanted to talk about Week 7 was such a big weekend with so many big matchups. We call them statement games.
Yeah.
So with so much on the line and so much to learn from everybody in Week 7, we wanted to follow up with some Week 7 statements.
Yeah.
Really get bold with what we're thinking after as many good matchups as we saw. So we were already going to talk about one quarterback coming out of Sunday's games, but I think after Lamar Jackson's performance, it's fair to throw him in there in your first statement.
You mean the guy that had 158.1 passer rating when the game ended?
Yes, that one.
Yeah, I got a statement for you.
Hit me with a statement from Week 7.
MVP is a 2-man race, and it's Lamar Jackson and Jared Goff. That is my statement. Honestly, Lamar has been playing well all season. We saw that with the graphic we had just thrown up there. But Jared Goff has done so many impressive things, especially when you consider what he's done in the last 4 games, that you kind of thought, all right, I guess he's the front runner. And then you just have Lamar Jackson saying, hey, hold my beer. I'm going to be right there with you. But it's these two. And then the next level down is just, it might as well not even be there, because they are so by far and away the 2 candidates for an MVP race. I'm
trying to think of like who else you need to mention, and I'll throw out Josh Allen.
Yeah.
Not that it's been on the same level, but the Bills are lurking right there. He hasn't thrown an interception yet. It's absolutely in play for him depending on how the season goes. Who else? I mean, I don't think it's, unfortunately, only playing 1 series from a statistical standpoint probably hurts Jayden Daniels. Am I forgetting anybody?
Yeah, I mean, Joe Burrow's on a really good tear, but you need some team success to kind of go along with that, and I think that's lacking. I think that could come.
It could, but right now, you can't say that.
Right, exactly. You can't say that, even as much of a tear as Joe Burrow is on. I mean, I'm looking at like passing yards leaders, and you have Kirk Cousins and Brock Purdy, but at 2 and 3, you have Geno Smith leading the league in passing yards. In fact,
I hate to admit this, but you do have to factor in wins when it comes to MVP, and we'll see what happens with Seattle. But sitting at 4 and 3, kind of trading wins and losses. I'll posit this to you, and I said it earlier. I would throw Josh Allen in there right after Goff and Lamar, and then you probably got to mention Derrick Henry not long after that. In the season that he's putting together.
In a vacuum, you're right. I'm too jaded into thinking that MVP really only is a quarterback award.
I mean,
you can do offensive player of the year. That's where I feel like they make up for the fact that there are other players that are deserving of this, and that's where Derrick Henry can slot in. But at this point, if we're going off the last few years, it's got to be a quarterback, and it's one of these two. I just want to give you some sense of what kind of class of quarterbacking we're talking about here. Because Jared Goff, in his last 4 games, an 84% completion rate, which is the highest of any qualified quarterback. But here's the kicker. He has an 84% completion rate while also leading the league in passing yards per attempt at 11.7 yards. So Jared Goff has this outrageous completion rate, but he is not necessarily just dinking and dunking his way down the field. He is pushing the ball down the field and is still connecting. Also, Jared Goff's receivers doing incredible things. He has only had 1 drop from his receivers this season so far. That's wild. So he's getting the support he needs. He's also behind the best offensive line in football. I'm just going to go ahead and say that. And what was most impressive to me, and why we are having this conversation this week in particular, is because of what Jared Goff and Ben Johnson were able to do against a previously unfigure-outable defense in Brian Flores and in Minnesota. What Brian Flores' defenses in Minnesota are so good at is the absolute anarchy that comes with it. Seriously, he is bending conventional defensive roles, or what we think of them, and asking guys to do things that shouldn't physically be possible. There is no there aren't tendencies. It doesn't have a shape. You don't know what he's trotting out, who's coming as far as pressure goes. I mean, the fact that Jared Goff and the Lions came in so prepared, what it looked like to me was that there was a 7-man protection on every single one of those plays. And it was up to Jared Goff to decide whether or not he was going to need it. Because you see things like the long ball to Sam Laporta over the middle of the field, where you have 7 guys up on the line of scrimmage from Brian Flores' defense. Somehow, some way, Jared Goff checks into something else, and you think, oh, he's telling Sam Laporta to stay in and block, right? No. Sam Laporta goes and releases into a route, and sure enough, only 5 guys come from Brian Flores' defense. How did he know that? No one else has been able to figure this out. So the mental gymnastics that Jared Goff is having to do, and then the production that he's having, is just unprecedented at this point. He is so smart. And Dan Campbell even said it on Monday. They put a lot on him. And I think when he said that, it meant he was making the decisions as to what he was looking at. He was diagnosing what he was looking at. That is such a smart thing to have to be able to do.
I love when our producers are on the same page as me, because as soon as you started talking about his performance yesterday, I knew we had this graphic right here because we ran it during the recap show.
Okay.
These are Jared Goff's numbers against Minnesota as opposed to Minnesota's first 5 opponents. And it's crazy the way that he basically doubled them up.
Yes.
More like twice as many yards per attempt, almost twice as good of a passer rating. Completion percentage is off the charts when you consider, like, again, 88 completion percentage when you're just checking down to the running back and the tight end every other snap, whatever. But Jared Goff was completing 88% while standing in the pocket, avoiding the rush,
yes,
and ripping the ball downfield on crossers to Amon-Ra St. Brown and finding Sam Laporta and getting Khalif Raymond involved. Like, these are not fake numbers. He earned every bit of this performance. It was incredible.
Our wonderful research team found a stat for us. Compared to previous MVP winners, all right? Since the 1970 merger, Jared Goff joins Aaron Rodgers, Kurt Warner, Roger Staubach as the only players to record a passer rating of 140 or higher in 3 consecutive games. Rodgers and Warner won MVP in those seasons. So he is on an MVP level. There is precedent for the numbers that he's putting up, and that precedent would suggest that Jared Goff should be taken seriously as an MVP contender. And again, this is splitting hairs because when you're talking about this being a 2-man race, it is a total toss-up at this point when you look at the tear that Lamar is also on.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not taking Jared Goff seriously at this point, I'd have to question what you're watching.
His nickname is Mr. Perfect on Pro Football Reference, so just want to throw that out.
Where does Pro Football Reference get these nicknames?
I don't know, but I enjoy them very much.
It's a wonderful little subplot. I think these guys will be in it until the very end. I'm not going to rule out the possibility that it's somebody else. Again, I've got my eye on you, Josh Allen. I know you're still out there. But it's interesting too, just to note, these are 2 teams that we thought going into the season would be pretty good. I mean, the reigning MVP, Lamar already won it last year.
Right.
And we knew the Lions had made it to the NFC title game. We're going to be seeing a lot of them, is what I'm trying to say. Yes. And maybe it's not the coolest thing in the world, but we have to admit narrative matters. And how you play in games like this where everybody's watching. I mean, Lamar doing this on a Monday night matters. I know
against a good team.
Yeah, absolutely. I know Goff against the Vikings was a early window game. There was a lot of other stuff going on, but also everyone in the NFL world knew to have this game on. Like, there were a lot of eyeballs.
If you had a quad box like I did going, everybody had sound on the Vikings Lions game. Like, that's what you were doing. That's what you were doing.
So both of these guys are going to get plenty more opportunities in big window games to show what they can do. I think it's going to be a really exciting subplot.
Yeah, and they're just exciting to watch. That's what's the coolest thing about it is, like, these aren't the guys that maybe, Lamar, you thought he'd come back and be really good, especially when they got Derrick Henry, all that kind of stuff. But Lamar Jackson is also playing a different style of football than we've really seen before. He leads the league in total passing expected points added, EPA, and total EPA. He's second in EPA per dropback. He is passing the ball at a better clip than he's ever done in his entire career. And it's so fun to watch. And then you have Jared Goff with all of the fun little weapons and the creativity of Ben Johnson. These are 2 teams that are just must-watch TV, and they're teams that no one's tired of.
I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I just don't want to have to explain it to Lamar or Ravens fans if he has an unequivocally better season than last year
and doesn't win
and
MVP.
Somehow doesn't win MVP. But that's a problem for the home stretch of the season.
And it's also champagne problems.
Yeah, that too. For now, just
especially if you trade individual awards for maybe team success.
That will be a question for late January. So Ravens fans, we're not even going to go there just yet, but an incredibly fun subplot to the season and a very nice opening week 7 statement. Big statements coming out of Monday Night Football. Let's just keep the party going with the rest of our week 7 statements. And Lord help me, Carmen, for what I'm about to do at the start of this segment. Are you ready?
Oh, Lord, he coming.
Yeah, I am. I'm going to zig where the rest of the football world is zagging coming out of this weekend. Okay. I'm going to start off this segment with one of my big statements, and that's that I can still see a path to the playoffs for the New York Jets.
Oh.
I'm not quitting this team, baby.
I mean, as detrimental as that probably is for your health, I totally understand it.
Part of it is definitely just me trying to cling to my priors from before the season, which age worse and worse by the week. But like, there is absolute truth to this. Like, I know the New York Jets are 2-5. I know they just lost another bad game in a primetime window.
I know. I keep picking them, and it hasn't worked out for me yet.
It's like a theme for a month now where you're like, here's why the Jets will be better. They're not better.
Or at least we'll win one game.
Here's the new reason.
They go through a coaching change. There's a bump with that. Oh, they get Devontae Adams. There's a bump with that.
Yeah, it's Haason Reddick now. It's Haason Reddick now. But there's truth to this. There is truth to this. I don't think it's as dire as it looks despite the win-loss record. And I want to start out with where the Jets have been for starters over the last month of the season. If we could take a look at it, their last 3 opponents, you're going to recognize quite a few of them. They went to London. They lost by 6 to the Minnesota Vikings. They lost by 3 at the buzzer to the Buffalo Bills on Monday Night Football. The Steelers did blow them out. I'm not even going to deny that. Although my man Beanie Bishop changed the chemistry of that game very severely.
Point and led to a Chris Collinsworth soliloquy on Beanie Babies, but that's neither here.
Beanie Bishop is one of my heroes of Week 7, but that's beside the point. These are some of the league's elite. The Vikings, we're going to get to them. A 5-1 Vikings team, the Josh Allen-led Buffalo Bills, and the Pittsburgh Steelers, who do their Mike Tomlin magic and do this every season. That's 3 teams that are a combined 15-5. So that's who you're playing for starters. Has not been easy for the New York Jets. And I don't think it's always going to be that hard. And you look at it, okay, they're 2-5. I get it. But what is an early theme for the season? The AFC, I'm going to call it watered down.
Yeah.
Like outside of the Ravens and the Chiefs.
I know.
Maybe if you want to, you can throw Buffalo in there.
I was going to say, you could probably, especially now with Amari.
We're talking about a conference where the LA Chargers and the Indianapolis Colts came into the weekend or are wild cards right now.
Right,
that's what you're talking about. The Denver Broncos are in the hunt. And I don't mean to disparage those teams, but being in the hunt is not as hard as it might have sounded at the beginning of the season. And that got me thinking, what exactly would it take to get the Jets into a wild card spot? And I think the answer could be as straightforward as 9 wins.
Yeah.
And if you think I'm crazy,
I don't.
You don't, but if you're listening and
Yes.
you think I'm crazy, I went back and looked at this. 8 teams in this new format. We've been doing a 7-team playoff on each side, 14 teams for 3 years. 8 teams in the last 3 years have reached the playoffs with single-digit wins. Now, 2 of those were division winners, so we'll throw them out. 6 of a possible 18 wild cards have won 9 games in this 7-team playoff format. So a third of the wild card field. So I think if the New York Jets can just get to 9 wins, this is in play. Now, again, maybe you think I'm crazy. You're saying, Dave, the New York Jets are 2-5. That would require a hell of a run through the back half of the schedule. I'm so glad you feel that way. Let's take a look at what's up for the New York Jets after this loss to Pittsburgh. I will throw this out there. If they lose to the New England Patriots this weekend,
then we can throw all of this away.
I revoke everything that I'm saying right now. But look at this schedule. You've got New England. You've got the Colts, the Seahawks, 2 games against the Dolphins, the Jacksonville Jags, the LA Rams. The way I see it, there's only 2 games against real deal contenders left on this schedule. You got the Houston Texans Halloween night on a Thursday at home, and you've got the return game against that Bills team that you just barely lost to last week. That's about it, though. Depending on where you want to look, ESPN, Warren Sharp, whoever's metrics you prefer, this is either the 4th or the 6th easiest schedule remaining in the NFL. Like, there's not a lot of world beaters here. And on top of that, I think the Jets are going to get a lot better. Like, I do think it matters that Devontae Adams is there. I do think it matters that Breece Hall is averaging 155 yards.
Figured out that they have Breece Hall on their team again.
It's amazing that it takes a play caller change to say, hey, we have one of the best running backs in the NFL.
Yeah.
155 yards from scrimmage on average over the last 2 games. He was averaging 69 in the 5 games
Honestly,
before that.
I love Breece Hall is one of my favorite players in the league, and the fact that he was being underutilized was just tragic. But we're getting better now. And I would also like to point out, I know Aaron Rodgers is 40. I know he's coming off an Achilles. But even if you go back to that last year with Green Bay, where objectively he wasn't the Aaron Rodgers that we were even used to seeing, The Packers still won 4 of their last 5 games. They were trying. They were making a playoff push at the end of that year and got knocked out of spite by the Detroit Lions. He knows how to turn it on, even and elevate the team around him and will the team to wins later in the season.
I think a big part of this take stems from the fact that the play that changed everything against Pittsburgh, the second Beanie Bishop interception that got him down on the goal line, was a dime to Garrett Wilson, where he just found the hole in the coverage, zipped, and it just bounced off Garrett's shoulder pads.
Yeah, I don't know. He had hands.
An incredible
on
throw.
It. I don't really understand how that ended up. There was that picture that was floating around Twitter.
Aaron Rodgers,
the ball right here.
Aaron Rodgers is quietly playing pretty good football the last few weeks, and I think it's only going to get better. It hinges on Garrett Wilson looking more like the guy I think he can be than the guy he was on Sunday night. It hinges on Devontae Adams still having gas in the tank, which I think he does. But I don't know, man. I think the Jets have what it takes to hit another year.
You are now every Jets fan.
That's fine.
Welcome to the plight of Jets fans everywhere, where it'll happen. It's gonna happen. I promise it's gonna happen.
They're top 5 in the league in sacks. They're top 3 in the league in sack percentage without Haason Reddick. I'm not gonna bank that Reddick's gonna do a whole lot. Right. It's asking a lot, but they haven't needed him to be useful to this point. They, even after what Russell Wilson did to them the other night, they have the best success rate in the league against the pass. Like, this is a perfectly solid defense, maybe not as elite as it has been in past years, but a perfectly solid defense. They're 11th in scoring. If the offense can just find half a dozen more good plays, I think they're going to be just fine. I need more from the offensive line.
Sure.
It's been rough. I wonder,
especially with 40-year-old quarterback behind you.
Yeah, I need Tyron Smith, Morgan Moses, Elijah Vera Tucker got injured in Pittsburgh the other night. Maybe find a place you can plug Olu Fashanu into the lineup, the first-round pick.
I would like them to find the place to plug him in and then keep him there. Also, let him get some reps and used to the speed of the game and what he's being tasked with doing. He was a phenomenal prospect. He was one of my favorite linemen coming into this draft.
That's another thing that gives me hope. Like, you have that extra guy to implement. And then,
this is the reason you drafted him that high, even though you already had Tyron Smith.
I thought you drafted him as insurance, but what I'm learning halfway through the season is maybe it's not about insurance. Maybe it's about finding the best 5 offensive linemen regardless. But I'm not out. I'm not out. And
no, that's fair.
I don't know. Fair. I'm not going to pretend to know how they calculate this, but the nerds aren't out either, because even after everything, the Jets' mathematical probability of making the postseason is at 34%, which is right in line with some other teams that we think a lot more highly of,
including the Chicago Bears.
The Chicago Bears, they're right in line with the Bengals. Like, they're completely alive mathematically. It's just on them to execute a little better. But I'm not ready to throw dirt on the New York Jets. That's my statement.
Okay. I'm with you. I'm like I said, Aaron Rodgers willed that Green Bay team, broken thumb and all, although it was pretty much healed by that point in the season. But 4 of their last 5, they lose to the Lions at the end of the year because of Dan Campbell and his spite, and barely miss the postseason, even when things were going terribly, or to start the season especially. So I'm not going to count them out quite yet. I might stop picking them until they can prove to me that they can win a game. Although this game,
I'm picking them this week.
I'm picking them for this game. You're right.
I am picking them this week. And if they don't beat New England, don't clip this out for me at 4 p.m. on Sunday if my statement has gone awry. But that's how I feel right now. What about you, Carmen? What's your next one?
My next statement. It's going to sound kind of harsh, I think, in the beginning, but I promise you it's not.
Sounds like you're bracing people now.
I am, because I'm about to say some, I don't know, but people are going to be mad at me. The Kansas City Chiefs are not the best team in the NFL. Patrick Mahomes is not in the MVP conversation.
What?
And yet there is no one I trust more to win the Super Bowl than the Kansas City Chiefs, which is it sounds so contradictory when you say it, but it's true. I mean, it is an objective fact that Patrick Mahomes is not part of the MVP conversation right now. I mean, he just had a 44.4 passer rating.
Worst of his career.
Against the Niners, which is the worst of his career. He's averaging only 231.5 yards per game this season, which is, again, a career low. Patrick Mahomes and Peyton Manning in 2015 are the only quarterbacks since the 1985 season to start 6-0 while throwing more interceptions than touchdowns. And do you know what Peyton Manning's team did that year?
I'm guessing they won the Super Bowl.
That was the year the Broncos won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
So again, I have more faith than ever that the Chiefs are going to three-peat. They might not lose a game, because if it can look this ugly and they still pull it out, they're still playing with their food even. I think that this was Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes getting together and being like, oh, the 49ers think they're pretty good at running the ball. Why don't we try to run the ball against them? And guess what? It worked. Also, the thing that people aren't talking enough about, Steve Spagnuolo.
I was going to say that Broncos defense you just brought up was pretty nice, was it not?
The reason the Chiefs have the luxury of changing up their offensive game plan to be petty and mess with their opponent and basically win at will is because of that man right there, Steve Spagnuolo, and his defensive scheme. And the way that this is going to sound like coach speak, but he knows his personnel so well and puts them in the positions that maximize their talent. You take guys like Trent McDuffie, for instance, who was an all-pro at slot corner last year. What do? They move him to the outside. Just as effective this year.
He's just a tinkerer, man.
He's phenomenal. You look at Chris Jones, who they move around the defensive line. I think what we're seeing more and more with these elite pass rushers is they stay like TJ Watt, Max Crosby. Those guys kind of stay to one side of the formation. Chris Jones is all over the place, and he's effective. The Chiefs' defense is 10th in EPA per play allowed. Most quarterback hits in the league with 35. They have the 5th best pass rush win rate as a team, the 9th highest pressure percentage. I can go on and on and on. They're letting up just 17.2 points per game. That ranks 5th in the NFL, and they're 1st in the league with big plays allowed with 26, as in fewest.
I'm guilty of falling for it's fun to talk about the new thing, and we love Brian Flores on this show. We love what the Vikings are doing. But when you talk about assistant coach, coordinator of the year, those types of conversations, it's easy to but it's easy to be enamored with the new success story, the guy who's doing something different and new. I hope people don't forget about Steve Spagnuolo when it comes time to give out those types of awards.
I think that's a fascinating conversation for another time, to talk about why Steve Spagnuolo is such a good coordinator versus why Brian Flores is such a good coordinator, like why each of those schemes are so difficult to play against. Because I think that they're effective for completely different reasons. But like I said, Steve Spagnuolo just has a knack for understanding his personnel so well and putting them in the exact right positions for each game, by the way. I mean, he is tinkering with this defensive scheme and what he's presenting constantly. And that is what good coordinators do. And that's what they maximize. And that's why you have this offense in Kansas City that doesn't seem to have any rhythm, doesn't seem to be the high-flying Chiefs of old. I actually found there's something about, I don't want to necessarily discredit Patrick Mahomes too, because I don't think that this necessarily works without Patrick Mahomes on the other side, because not only...
I'd go as far as to say there's no chance it does.
Yes, because I found this one particular stat that I thought was particularly interesting. So Patrick Mahomes ranks 24th in passer rating this year, right? In the league. He is 4th in success rate. So he is getting things done for his team. He is doing just enough, as Steve Spagnuolo's defense is letting up a minuscule amount of points when he talks 17.2 points per game. Patrick Mahomes is still doing enough on the offensive side of the ball. It may not be coming in the form of passing metrics. It may not be coming in the way that we usually see it, but he is still doing enough to get it done.
They are one of the most efficient offenses in the NFL, despite a lack of any sort of highlight play or sizzle to speak of. Like, they're really not getting it from anybody other than Patrick Mahomes' repeated ability to get the conversion that they need in the spot that they're in pretty much always.
And he makes really good decisions. Patrick Mahomes has the second most throwaways of any quarterback this year. So basically, like, he knows exactly if the play's not there. So he's not putting, again, this defense, which I think should be the focal point of this Kansas City team. He's not putting them in precarious situations. He's not putting them in sudden change situations where they're having to come out and defend a short field or anything like that. He is being smart with the football. It's not, like I said, it's not translating into all these gaudy metrics that's going to get him an MVP award, but he is still the most efficient quarterback. He's still an incredibly special player. And this Chiefs team is such a contradiction to itself as a result.
They're just, we're in the twilight zone with the Chiefs. There's
when is what other team have you ever been able to say, yeah, they're not the best team in the league, but you know what? I still trust them to win the Super Bowl.
There were probably some Patriots teams during that second run of Tom Brady.
I would say the first run of Tom Brady, because he wasn't particularly.
Yeah, but that was like late career Tom Brady when he was, had been playing for 18 years, and like people used to talk like, oh, does Tom have enough help here? Like, have the Patriots invested in enough offensive weapons? We did that as well.
Yeah.
And Tom made up for a lot of that. Like, but I would say, I don't know how many teams have ever on the offensive side of the ball been working with the rash of injuries and the lack of options and bringing guys in week of like Kareem Hunt the way the Kansas City Chiefs are.
That's the other thing about this too, is you look at the guys that they could still get back this year, which is Isaiah Pacheco. Hollywood Brown could return in the postseason. You've got Jalen Watson. It's still TBD. Juju Smith-Schuster out for this next week, but could return after. Like, you have guys that could conceivably come back at some point throughout this season to help these guys, especially when it ends up being crunch time at the end of the year or into the postseason, which they're inevitably going to make.
It's inevitably.
Yes, they are.
No,
they are
yeah.
Thanos. They are inevitable.
Dude.
The Kansas City Chiefs are Thanos. Maybe that should have been my statement.
It's the ultimate litmus test where you're right. Look, I mean, we'll get to the power rankings later in the show, but every week I look at them at the top of the power rankings, and you're tempted to move them sometimes because you're like, did they have the prettiest game? Do they look like the best team? Are they doing the most fun
they're not the most
stuff?
complete team. They don't look like the best team.
And every week I refuse to move them down because
I refuse to bet against them.
Ever. You're not going to fool me, Kansas City Chiefs. You're not going to get me on one of those postseason cut-up videos when you're bragging about all of this later. It ain't going to be me. So I'm with you. I'm a complete believer in the Kansas City Chiefs. And you know who else I'm a believer in? This is my last statement for week 7. It's actually about another team that lost. I guess I'm sticking up for the teams that had bad weeks. Like, we got enough people talking good about the Lions and the Chiefs.
Ooh.
I'm going to stick up for the Minnesota Vikings, who impressed the hell out of me in a losing effort. And I said this before, I didn't need to see this.
Yeah.
I already believed in the Vikings based on what they did in the first 5 weeks of the season. But going toe-to-toe with the Lions the way they did, I think the Vikings are the real deal. Like,
somebody had to lose that game, and for the first time the entire season, it was the Minnesota Vikings. Like, that's wild.
Their first loss of the year comes in the final minute on a field goal after just haymaker after haymaker. They opened this game on a 10-0 run.
Yes.
Fell down by multiple possessions, and I think I said this on the recap show where you look at it and you're like, oh, the Vikings have been playing ahead for so long. If you're watching, you can see it. They've only been trailing for 36 and a half minutes of this season. Adam Amin made a great note during this broadcast on
Shout
Fox.
out, Adam.
They got the ball. They were down 14-10. The Lions rallied. They got the ball halfway through the second quarter in week 7. It was their 7th offensive snap of the season while not leading.
Yeah, with
like,
Sam
with
Darnold's. Yeah, Sam Darnold's like 7th snap.
But what's crazy is it's natural to think like, okay, the game script's not going in their favor. This is a different caliber of team, and they went down 21-10. And I think I even thought at some point in the third quarter, I was like, okay, Vikings, like nice day, but the better team's gonna win. And lo and behold, they come right back. They get into it with their defense.
Going into this game, you mentioned how they were only trailing like 30. They've only trailed like
36 and a half minutes of the season.
Going into this game, they had only trailed for like 3.5 minutes.
Yeah.
That was the wild part. But you're right. Coming back from down a deficit where you essentially were like, okay, this is their turning back into a pumpkin moment. And it wasn't.
No pumpkin here.
There was no pumpkin there.
I know it's like Halloween season, but there ain't no pumpkin here. And I can't help but think of a couple years ago, the Vikings were such a hot topic when they were winning games. In 2022, we spent all year debating.
This team is not that team.
Bro, I went back and looked it up. Like the 2022 Vikings were fun as hell because it was always dramatic, but they were eking out wins by 3, 4, 7, 8. Like
they had a negative point differential while they were winning.
Their losses were by 11, 17, 24, and 37. They lost the game by 37 points, Carm.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is not that.
No.
This I'm going to go as far as to call it sustainable. And the big thing that you question, like I believe wholly in the defense. I believe what Brian Flores is doing. 14 takeaways, top of the league in sacks, top 5 in pressure, all that good stuff. Sam Darnold, in a losing effort, 8th in the league in EPA per dropback for week 7, top 10 in passer rating. He did have the, I will call it the questionable decision on the interception to Brian Branch.
But he bounced right back.
Exactly. If your worst day is an eerily similar stat line to Jared Goff, 22 of 27 for 259, the touchdown to Justin Jefferson, long bomb to Jordan Addison, like he's not afraid to take the deep shots.
No.
More often than not, his better judgment prevails. He does. There's no way around it. He does get away with some reckless decision making. I guess you could say he didn't get away with it against the Lions, but more often than not, he's doing what's asked of him, making the big plays when they're there and managing the game extraordinarily well. And if you can do it against Detroit, I trust you can keep doing it. And that's the fun thing too, Carm, is this is what, game 4 against a contender? Game 4 against the team that we think really highly of because they already beat the Niners. They already beat the Texans. They already beat the Packers. I appreciate the Vikings because a lot of times at this point in the year, we have to guess and extrapolate and say like, what is it going to look like when you get into a game against a better team? We already know.
Right. They've
beaten several of them and they came as close to beating the Lions as you can come without actually winning the game. And that's even with Jared Goff slicing them up. I mean, he was phenomenal against their blitz, but I'm going to go ahead and guess right now, not very many quarterbacks will be that effective against what the Vikings are.
I mean, Dan Campbell said it on Monday, just how much they put on Jared Goff's plate to really sift through what Brian Flores was doing. Because the biggest thing, and I brought the stat up a few weeks ago, actually, I'm going to bring it back up because the Vikings are they're tied for the most unblocked pressures with 34. And it's not because guys are not accounting for Brian Flores in this defense. It's that they don't know where the pressure is coming from. What Jared Goff did so well in this game was somehow figure out, I don't know if it was a tell or if it's Ben Johnson in his ear. I mean, both of these guys had to be in the film room the entire week, figuring out, all right, when they present this look, who is actually coming? Because Jared Goff was the best at it of anybody, including guys like Aaron Rodgers. And if you have that high of a hit rate as this defense does in Minnesota, that's what really makes me believe this is all sustainable. Because even if Sam Darnold doesn't thrive or makes mistakes like that interception, you know that you have a defense that can back you up. You have such a complete team in Minnesota on both sides of the ball. And that is what makes me believe in this team so much. And that's what makes me think that this is for real. And that why I've thought it is for real for the last few weeks, because you can't really find a huge hole in any of this.
This is definitely cope because the Vikings did lose the game and I get that. But like even in a losing effort, and even though Jared Goff played really outstanding in this game,
15 straight completions.
The Vikings sacked him 4 times. Yeah. And they also strip sacked him. Yes. He just had the very good fortune to have that fumble bounce right back up into his ribs. So like even on a day where the Lions were rolling, the Vikings were doing their thing too, and I trust that that's going to work way more often than it does.
I'm not trying to sell you on moral victories, Minnesota fans. I know that you've spent way too long having to cling to those, but you should, like, the Vikings should not feel bad for losing this game to the Lions.
No. And
these are the two heavyweights in the NFC North. These are the two heavyweights in the NFC. Full stop.
I'm not. I'm gonna say I don't think the Packers are too many rungs below these two.
I don't either, but I don't think it's hyperbole to say that these are two of the best teams in the conference.
Not even a little bit. And I don't want to be the guy that counts wins and losses ahead of time too often. I already did that for the Jets. Go ahead and look at the Vikings schedule and tell me who's on it that they should be afraid of. That's
a lot of division teams, really.
Well, and two in particular, Packers, Vikings back-to-back to end the regulars. Excuse me, Packers, Lions back-to-back to end the regular season. And man, I hope the stakes are high for those because it sounds like a hell of a lot of fun. Does it for our Week 7 statements, Carm. As always, I appreciate your help. We'll chat with you real soon. Let's get into our weekly chat with NFL on Fox Insider Jay Glazer. Big week to be catching up with Jay with so much injury news coming out of Sunday. On Monday morning, I had a chance to talk to Jay about a variety of those situations, the quarterback situation in Cleveland, Jayden Daniels' injury in Washington. Not to mention, we followed up with Jay about Mike Tomlin's gutsy call to make a quarterback change in Pittsburgh on Sunday night. Really fun conversation with Jay Glazer. Check it out. All right, Jay, a lot of stuff to get to this week, but we got to start here, man, because Mike Tomlin called a shot like he was Babe freaking Ruth over the weekend. And he talked to you about it on Sunday morning. You had the chance. You're the only guy that talked to Mike Tomlin about this decision. And he said he went Lone Ranger with the decision to swap out Justin Fields for Russell Wilson. Safe to say it worked out pretty well. Big win for the Steelers, but man, can you take me inside that conversation that you had with him and that decision that Mike T apparently made all on his own?
Yeah, it's funny because whenever I have something about Mike T, people like to label it, oh, Mike Tomlin's friend Jay Glazer, instead of just, Jay Glazer, Fox NFL Sunday, to like quantify themselves. But yeah, this is a relationship-based business, and he and I have had a strong relationship since he was the Buccaneers as Rondé Barber and John Lynch's defense backs coach. So we have really straight conversations. And in this conversation, I pressed him too, like, dude, I'm supposed to be the crazy one. Like, what are you doing here? And it was when he said, I went Lone Ranger on it, but he also said, look, I have two capable quarterbacks in this building, and I'm not trying to win games. I'm trying to win a world title. This is what I'm trying to do. Well, I can't evaluate both quarterbacks if I haven't seen one. I know what I have in one, and it's really good, but I got to see what I have in the other guy also, because we're 2 weeks away from our bye. We're 2 weeks away from the trade deadline. I got to know what I really have in both. And he said, I went Lone Ranger, and I can tell you this, because it's interesting also the relationship when things happen sometimes inside the Steelers. Players will call me, coaches will call me, and go, man, can you talk sense into him? Hey, my teammate listening here. It's really funny how that happens. And in this case, it was a resounding, I shouldn't say resounding, it was a strong opposition for it, even inside his own building. And it was like he went in there and he told the players, this is why I'm doing it. This isn't a knock on Justin. I just want to see what I have in both these guys before we make a long-term decision going forward. He said, it was interesting. He said, as the season gets deeper, it gets narrower. And I got to know what I got there as this road gets a lot narrower so I can make a full decision. And he, after the game, texted me right away. He goes, what I get compensated for? I said, hey, I get compensated to listen to guys like you when you make these decisions. And, I can make my judgments. But it certainly worked out. And everybody here has also texted me today like, man, Mike T is a G. Like, he is a G. He is a gangster who, here's something about Mike Tomlin. He has a really rare trait. He does not care what anybody thinks about him. And it's rare. Like me, I ain't like that. My feelings get hurt. Sure. Him, feelings don't get hurt. He does, and he's not on social media. He doesn't read the media. He doesn't read anything. So I'll call him and go, hey, man, what about this? He's like, what you talking about, bro? I got no idea what you're talking about. Like, he has no idea. So I'll like fill him in on things. He's like, not my wheelhouse. Don't care. Like, he has this really rare trait where he does not care what people say about him. And that allows him, when he draws that gun, he sticks to that gun.
That's what I was going to ask you, and I've never met Mike. I don't know him on a personal level, but I've been such a long time admirer of the confidence that he exudes, and people give him a lot of credit for being able to rein in some of the Steelers' bigger personalities over the years, and just I mean, it just seems like a superpower the way that he can just sort of stay the course, and I feel like wherever this season goes for the Steelers, this is going to be very memorable for me. Even in the NFL, I don't know how many guys are willing to do this, stick to it, have total confidence, and not be bothered by the noise.
And by the way, he also said to me, hey, it doesn't work out, I'll shoulder it. It's on me. I got no problem with this. And a lot of guys don't have that confidence also. But man, you look at what Mike Tomlin's done also with the characters he's had in that organization, from Antonio Brown and Ben and Le'Veon and man, and the Martavis Bryant and Chase Claypool and all these people. He needs a Nobel Peace Prize, an Emmy, an Oscar, a Grammy, like all Peabody, everything you can give, you got to give this guy. Erect another bridge out there, and in Pittsburgh, put a stadium up. Like, it's just and the fact that the dude has never had a losing season, yet everybody wants him fired every time something goes south over there. He's different. And I'll tell you this too. We have a special thing we put together, he and I, at the NFL owners meeting every year. And it's with other coaches. And he's the Pied Piper. Every coach in the NFL, like, these guys gravitate. They can't wait to be around Mike Tomlin and just kind of hear his Mike T-isms and hear his wisdom. And this dude has seen everything and been through everything. And look, I thought he was crazy for this move. I told him, thought he's crazy for this move. I was pretty strong about it. And he was like, this is on me. I got it. I'm Lone Ranger it, and this is why. And then after explained it, I'm like, all right, I understand his reasoning. And this guy's a leader of men. I like to learn from leader of men.
Even like, no matter where this goes, and obviously there's a lot of season left, but like, this is going to be a memorable footnote in the very accomplished career of Mike Tomlin. I thought it was awesome. I loved that you had that report on Sunday morning. It was so cool to see.
He did not waver, man. And listen, like I said, coaches not happy about it. Also credit to the coaching staff. Once Mike T said, this is my decision, they're all like, our job is to prepare Russell and the team and get them to come together around this. And you didn't hear anybody moan about it publicly. You didn't hear anybody say they weren't happy with this move. You heard all of us outside the building say it. You heard nobody inside the building. You heard no unnamed coaches ripping it. You heard no unnamed players ripping it. Like, it is a superpower of his to keep everybody together on that same page. And you don't hear things about people in the Steelers until they leave.
Right. Yes.
Right. I tell people all the time, don't do business with Mike T. Don't, because you're going to think you're getting this choir boy, and then come over here and you're like, oh, he ain't a choir boy. Man, this guy's disruptive, right? It's hilarious.
It's so true. So much respect for what Mike Tomlin does in Pittsburgh. I can't wait to see how they build on that big win against the Jets.
By the way, I brought Brett Michaels from Poison to Steelers camp with us this year, and because Brett's one of my best friends, and he grew up in Pittsburgh and used to go to their training camp. So Brett has been hitting me up constantly with their success. That it's all him. This is all him. It's all Brett Michaels because he was at camp. He's the guy who's making all these decisions. He's like, I'm just saying. And he said,
good vibes, baby.
He went to training camp. They won a Super Bowl. So Brett Michaels taking full credit for this.
Maybe stream some Poison songs if you're a Steelers fan, in appreciation for the hot start. Wanted to get your take on some of the several huge injury updates or injury situations, unfortunately, happened in week 7. I think none more important probably than the rib injury that Jayden Daniels suffered. We talked about it yesterday. His mom gave us an update during the game that he's fine. Have you heard anything else about that situation, what we might expect from Jayden Daniels?
Yeah, they're getting an MRI on it today, but they didn't think it was bad. They didn't think there was anything broken in there. They thought it was minor. And obviously the game had gotten away, which is, good for them. So they're able to protect him. But yeah, you saw the competitive nature of Jayden Daniels just slamming his helmet down. Other when you have a rib injury, you don't want to turn and torque, but he did.
Right.
But obviously, protecting him from himself. So as of the last I had heard, they didn't think it was anything major, but we're waiting for the tests.
Fair enough. It's kind of the vibe you got, especially like I said, when his mom's giving you a live update. Unfortunately, a much more serious looking one was the Brandon Aiyuk situation. Sounds like an ACL.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a season ender for San Francisco. We talked last week. I mean, it's a great story that Ricky Pearsall returned to action Sunday, but I mean, it looks like you're going to be asking for some heavy lifting from some young receivers in San Francisco the rest of the way.
Cowing did a good job yesterday, and that's the thing. Also, it's like I remember in camp talking to Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch saying, "Listen, if you don't get anything for Aiyuk, it doesn't happen." Or let's say he went down during the season. Do you think your season would be over? They're like, no. I'm like, well, now we're in that same situation. So listen, they as hard as yesterday was, I did talk to Kyle and John. I was like, hey, listen, you took King Kong to the brink with no McCaffrey, no Debo, no Aiyuk. Like, you got to think about that, right? And when you get those other, Debo was an interesting thing yesterday because it was in warmups. He just had a hard time breathing.
Right.
And they weren't able to just open it up. So that was obviously when you have a huge game plan centered around a weapon like that, and all of a sudden you have to pull off it, then you lose Aiyuk, and you already don't have McCaffrey in there. When they get those guys back, as hard as this is with Brandon Aiyuk, I think that team more than anybody else has a next man up mentality, and it started with their quarterback in Brock Purdy. That's what I said to him. I said, I thought you guys probably thought when Brock had to come in, you were just dead in the water. Clearly that wasn't the case. They have a special next man up mentality. I know we say it sounds cliche. Most teams can't do it. The Niners have.
It's crazy how easy it is to forget that Brock was called in spur of the moment. Like it feels like he's been their franchise guy forever at this point. But
that's the culture that Kyle Shanahan has over there. Like you're on our roster, you're expected to step in. That's that.
Last one, we did get word Monday morning. We know it's a ruptured Achilles for Deshaun Watson. He's obviously done for the year. I mean, the ramifications of that are going to be interesting just when you talk about a fully guaranteed contract and what that means. But in the here and now, I do think it's interesting. I talked about this on the show yesterday. The Browns demoted Jameis Winston on Sunday morning and gave Dorian Thompson-Robinson the backup duties. So where do they go from here? Obviously, DTR got hurt as well, and Jameis finished the game. But what do you think is the next man up, I guess, in Cleveland with Deshaun Watson out?
I think it'll be DTR as long as and the test came back negative for him. But here's the thing about Deshaun Watson. They still have to pay him his fully guaranteed contract for this year and another $92 million for the next 2 years. And the cap hits are just dramatic for them over there. So I think they got to hope that a guy like DTR can become like a Brock Purdy because his cap is nothing, right?
Right.
If that's the case, and you can still kind of, hope to build over there. But no, this obviously goes down as, one of the worst signings or trades you could ever have. And it's, he's going to be done for this year. But last year he was done and they went all the way to the playoffs. Let's see if, Kevin Stefanski has that magic again.
I mean, that is a very valid point. Do you think?
And with Nick Chubb back, by the way, what a comeback by Nick Chubb! Unbelievable.
Great point. It got buried by the injury news for sure,
right? Because he had 2 surgeries to overcome this gruesome knee injury. And I talked to Stefanski Saturday about him. He's like, man, it was so cool for me to have a front row seat to watch this guy. I always say the secret of greatness is the work you put in when no one's watching. And to have this guy, he said, I'd be sitting there in camp. And he'd be running these hills, just him and his strength coach, with nobody else around, no one watching. I'd sit there for practice, come out and do some stuff. And he's running sprints just by himself. It's that work you put in when no one's watching. So I got to see, the work ethic and the comeback firsthand. He said, and I had to remind myself a bunch, like, man, this is incredible what this guy is trying to return from. He said, that's his work ethic. But he said, because I'm used to being around him, I didn't want to take it for granted. Like, this is different. This comeback's different from what he went through to come all the way back from the amount of damage that was in that knee. And now that they didn't have him last year on that playoff run. So now that they have him, certainly going to help DTR out.
There's no lack of talent on that Browns roster, but DTR, I guess will be the first guy up. Maybe Jameis Winston. Either way, going to be tough to dig out of a 1-6 hole, but we'll see how they do it. Last thing I wanted
to, like, if you go like next year, let's say, Deshaun comes all the way back, and let's say made it to the playoffs again. I don't know, but just knowing the guarantees, and like, you got to kind of just sit them on your roster no matter what, and just eat the money at this point.
I mean, it's hard to overstate
2
how
years
badly they're set back
overcoming injuries, another year being out. It's just, as you go on, it's just not the same guy.
No, I mean, that seemed evident before the injury, but I mean, how the Browns navigate this, I don't envy Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski in that regard. The last thing I wanted to get your thoughts, your updates on. We talked last week about Haason Reddick's agents let him go, and Drew Rosenhaus quickly picked him up and got him back into the Jets building. And I mean, it felt like it took no time at all. I mean, what happened there? What was the process of getting Haason Reddick reconciled with the New York Jets?
Some of it was the hope that, the Jets still have the right to levy the fines, but they're gonna. I think it was a trust that, okay, we'll waive some of these fines, whatever there is. Some fines you can waive, some fines you can't. They shifted some more potential money if there are certain things that are hit. So he has the ability to make some more up. But also, this was a bizarre holdout, because let's say he just went the whole year, his contract told, which means the Jets would have had him for another year, the same exact money. And if they wanted to go fully on all the fines, he would have had $0 this year. It would have exceeded what he would have made. So it was kind of bizarre from a guy who's really every year just, put his freaking helmet on and just cause issues for offenses. And it was just a bizarre thing. So I'm glad to see he's coming in. Whenever a guy has a situation like this, I'm always kind of like, man, when you lose money like this, it's money you can never get back. Yeah. So I'm glad it's behind him. I hope he goes out there and balls out. Whatever was going on, I like to see when guys get in there. And football is not a career; it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for set you up for other things in life if you want. It's an opportunity to get teammates for life. To really help you. And when guys willingly step away from some of these opportunities, I always hope they kind of see the light, and I'm glad he did.
I get nervous when a guy misses as much time as Reddick now has, but I mean, if there's a caliber of player that can sit out for that long and still make an impact, it's probably Haason Reddick.
I also don't know I have no idea what kind of workout guy he is.
Yeah, sure.
I have no idea what he's been doing in the offseason. And you saw Aiyuk when he came back, and he wasn't. It took him a while. He had one game.
Slow start. Yep.
It's a slow start. Some guys come right in. It doesn't matter, right? And but a lot of it depends on what you've been doing away. Some guys they live to train. I don't know enough about Haason to tell you one way or the other.
We're going to find out in short order, because the Jets need results eventually if they're going to keep this season alive. So we'll see how it goes. Jay, so much good insight, man.
Appreciate it, man.
Always appreciate it. We'll catch up with you next week.
Hi, brother.
That just about does it for the show. Thanks again to Carmen Vitali. Thanks to Jay Glazer for hopping on. Always appreciate it. One last thing to get to before we look forward to week 8. That's the power rankings. Let's dive into it. If you guys could throw me a little graphic that has everybody on it. It's an interesting week in the power rankings. There it is. We'll talk about some movement at the top, but as we like to do, let's start down. We're going to take a team from each part of the power rankings this week. If you want to see the full thing, it's on foxsports.com, the Fox Sports app. Please leave some feedback. Maybe be kind. People read those comments sometimes. All right, let's start down at number 30. A very interesting case with the Miami Dolphins, because they are right now the version that we have gotten used to, one of the most unwatchable teams in football. Since Tua Tagovailoa got hurt, Miami's averaging 10 points per game. They lost to the Colts 16-10. Don't really feel like talking much about it. It's not a very watchable product, and it hasn't been since that injury, but Tua Tagovailoa aiming for a return. He talked to reporters in Miami on Monday. Sounds like he's got a shot to play in week 8. Tua very assertively basically said, I appreciate your concern about my health. I know that I have had issues with concussions. I'm fine. I'm going to play. Regardless of how you feel about that decision, I respect Tua's right to do so. It's an interesting situation to say the least. The Miami Dolphins have been a very bad team for about a month, but they are only 2-4. And with Tua in the lineup, they have been a much better team than that. Is he returning in time to salvage this season? I guess we're going to see. So might be the most interesting 30th team in the NFL that I've ever profiled in the power rankings. Something to watch there. Let's jump up to the Denver Broncos, moving up 2 spots to number 18. Not a huge jump because I don't know how much I learned about them going against the Saints practice squad. Sorry, Broncos fans. Just not a true test of an NFL team's capability with everything that was missing from that Saints roster on Thursday night. That's not their problem, though. They are a playoff team right now. They would be the 7th seed in the AFC if the season ended today, and they get to play the Panthers next. 5-3 feels very possible. I would even say likely, but we're not going to have to wonder how good they are for a whole lot longer because after that Panthers game, it's Chiefs-Ravens back-to-back. So stack these wins while you can, Broncos. We'll see if you can hold on to them after that. 18 feels totally fair to me. Jumping up to number 14, dropping 3 spots, the San Francisco 49ers. They're below 500. I never thought they would drop this far on the year, to be honest. I still believe in them, to be honest with you. Like, I still think the cavalry can be coming. Report coming out today that the Niners think Christian McCaffrey could come back after the bye week. Best wishes to Deebo Samuel. He's in the hospital with pneumonia, but I would imagine it's not a super long-term injury or illness, I should say. It is a huge blow that Brandon Aiyuk is out for the year. Don't get me wrong, but I still think there's enough talent in San Francisco to overcome this. I am starting to have questions about their ceiling and whether eventually you get to a breaking point with so much frustration, so many missed opportunities. But on the flip side, if you're a Niner fan, all of that stuff went wrong for you, and you're a Brock Purdy red zone interception in the end zone away from really making that a game against the Kansas City Chiefs. I mean, it looked lopsided late, but San Francisco was competitive in that game against Kansas City. I'm not going to exaggerate how bad it looks for the 49ers because it does look pretty bad right now, but got a game against Dallas. You got a bye week, a lot of football left. I'm not writing them off. Let's jump up to number 9, the Philadelphia Eagles. I moved them up 4 spots because I thought, based on what we saw against Cleveland, beating the Giants would be a little bit harder. It was not. They raced past those guys. Very impressive. And there are issues with this team, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I'm comfortable making a bet that there just aren't very many teams in the NFL that can stop Saquon Barkley and the run game while simultaneously dealing with A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and everything the Eagles can do in the passing game. Like, yeah, there are teams that can do it, and those teams are Super Bowl contenders, but the vast majority of the league, I don't think, can keep up with the firepower that the Eagles bring to the table. That's why I've got them in the top 10. And let's finish this thing off in the 2 spot and the 3 spot. I don't know. I'll be honest. I don't know what to do here. I've got the Detroit Lions jumping up 2 spots. I've got them jumping over Baltimore because they beat one of the NFL's only unbeatens. They took down the Vikings on the road in Minnesota. Very impressive game from Jared Goff. We talked all about it. I was positive nobody would play a more impressive game than Detroit. And then Baltimore went on the road and rolled over what I think of as a playoff team in Tampa Bay. They looked just as good. So if you're mad at me because you think the Ravens should be number 2, I agree. And if you're mad at me because I'm questioning the Lions at number 2, I also agree. I don't really think you can go wrong here. So for me, it's Detroit at number 2, Baltimore at 3. If you feel the opposite, totally understand it. We'll parse this out as the season goes along, just like we will with the MVP race, I guess. And then in the 1 spot, no, not even second guessing it. I got the Kansas City Chiefs. They win ugly. They win all sorts of different ways. I don't care. They just win. They got Patrick Mahomes. Does not matter to me about style points when you're talking about the Chiefs. So that does it for the power rankings. That does it for the show. Week 7 was fun, man. I mean, every week is fun, but this one felt particularly epic. Just so many moments, so many good games. We'll see if we can follow it up. We'll be back with the Week 8 preview on Thursday. Plenty to look forward to. Check in with Peter Schrager. Have our usual chat with Greg Olson. Can't wait. We really appreciate it. Make sure, if you're not, go give us a follow on the socials at NFL on Fox Pod. If you want to go subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, we would really appreciate that as well. Make sure we are in your feed on Thursday as we get you ready for all things Week 8. Until then, I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you real soon.